Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics. So, housing looks like another big winner from Labour's spending reviews. Rachel Reeves announced a spending of an average of £4 billion a year over the next 10 years for affordable homes. Now, how does this compare with the current situation? Well, the Conservatives spent an average of £2.4 billion a year in the last Parliament, and that was when they were increasing spending after a decade of neglect. So, what will this 65% increase in the funding look like for ordinary people? But first, for daily news and politics, please hit the subscribe button to stay notified. So, by all accounts, the fur has been flying during negotiations between individual government departments and the Treasury for this spending review. It is, of course, understandable that the conversations would be very tough for two main reasons. First, most of the Secretaries of State pitching for the money are new to the game, as is the Chancellor herself. Second, and more importantly, there's just not enough money to go round. All government departments will always want as much funding as possible, of course. If any Secretary of State ever thinks they have enough, they should be fired for having no ambition. But this is a very different situation to under the last Labour government. Back then, departments got the money they needed, and then some got much more in order to really push forwards. A case of some departments moving ahead whilst others sort of got left behind, like transport at the time. This time, some departments may carry on going actually backwards for a bit in order that higher priority departments can move forward. But housing is joining the NHS, energy, transport and defence in moving forwards. Rayner apparently had to fight really very hard, but has secured a 65% boost to funding for affordable housing. But there's also something else in the detail as well for social housing groups. £39 billion over 10 years for affordable housing, which is a massive chunk of the £113 billion of capital spending being announced. Although people are not unreasonably concerned about Labour's squeeze on day-to-day spending, they're betting that the benefits will come by shifting more money to boosting infrastructure. The question, of course, is will the benefits arrive before Labour face major challenges in a general election? See, people would have imagined that they would have had 10 years in power to prove themselves. So as long as they started to show the benefits after 10 years, they'd be in good shape. However, with recent missteps, it's going to be squeaky bum time for the government in the next few years. Quite a lot of their investment announcements are not going to be up and running until the early 2030s, like the stuff on nuclear, for example. That's not coming before the next election. So Labour will also need to make sure that they have something to show by 2029. And housing is one of their big ticket shorter term offers, along with NHS improvements. One of the problems we have is not just that there aren't enough houses in lots of parts of the country where they're needed, but that in some other areas there are unoccupied houses that social housing groups would like to acquire but can't afford. The announcement today should help in two ways. First, more money for more affordable housing means social housing groups have better supply. Second, social housing groups are to be allowed to raise rents 1% above inflation for the next few years, allowing them to access some of that housing which is currently available but not affordable. The situation right now is we have as much social housing now as pretty much we did over 20 years ago, but the population has increased and so has poverty. At the turn of the millennium, there were 13 million people in the UK considered to be in relative poverty. Now it's 15 million people, but the stock of social housing hasn't increased to compensate. You know, this trend, or rather lack of a trend, should be corrected now. Of course, funding is one thing, but can we physically build the new homes? There have been concerns in the industry that there might not be the capacity to build the average 300,000 new homes a year that Labour have promised. Now, a couple of ways of looking at this. First is that it might not matter if they don't quite hit the target, as long as people feel that housing problems in their lives are easing. It's a little bit like growing the economy. Like if the economy flatlines for the rest of the Parliament, but the distribution of wealth filters down better, and so most voters feel better off, well, that's what's important. Same with housing. Labour not only have plans for a greater proportion of affordable and social housing, along with council housing, but giving first-time buyers first dibs on new builds helps keep the prices down. Also, Labour have planned the building of some brand new towns as well. It's going to be quite a lot of Milton Keynes floating around. Basically, as long as Labour makes sure that when new homes are built, that they are being better utilised for people who want somewhere to live and less on profits, then they will win. But the second way to look at it is the situation might actually be a little bit more hopeful. I see reports now that building companies are getting a lot more interest from investors, and building suppliers are confident as well. Seems to be more optimism that the industry can power up than was maybe the case last year. And the plans have been welcomed by housing groups as well. Shelter, the National Housing Federation, they've both praised this announcement. So this is not a case of, oh, it looks quite good, and yeah, it might be a bit better than the Tories, but that's not the bar. No, this has been welcomed by independent groups who lobby specifically for housing policy which works in the interests of those who struggle to afford decent housing. Essentially, this week represents the start of the next phase in Labour's decade of renewal, and the one where they aim to start promoting the benefits of the vote people gave them last year. Will it work? Well, there have been setbacks. In Labour's original plan, they would get the unpopular stuff out of the way early, when they thought people would accept it. Then, after the major legislation had passed and the spending review was announced, which it is being this week, it would be wall-to-wall good news and then power on towards the next election from there. However, there have been a couple of spanners in the works. The first is that the public were not at all happy to accept that things should get worse before they got better. So Labour's economic doom and gloom message last year went down very badly, along, of course, with the winter fuel cuts and more recently disability cuts in some key areas for Labour. Their child poverty strategy, which has still not technically been revealed in detail, was dealt a blow by figures showing it's only actually going to get worse. Labour cannot afford to go into the next election without child poverty at least being notably lower. The second problem is there are still headwinds to come. The general strategy can still work. If all we're going to get now is Labour ministers announcing new projects, job creation, cheaper housing, better workers' rights, lower NHS waiting times, more bus routes, fewer train cancellations, and so on, absolutely they can start to build up some momentum, take the fight to reform UK whilst crushing the Tories into the dirt. Yes. They would still do better to sort their messaging out, which has done them no favours so far. However, the bad news may not be over. The reason why Labour are able to announce decent boosts to infrastructure spending for the NHS, transport, energy, housing and, in time, defence is because Reeves has borrowed heavily. But the cost of borrowing is now higher after nearly 2 decades of being really very low, and the cost is only increasing as Trump carries on farting all over the global economy. Independent economists seem to be of the view that Reeves is going to have to either raise taxes or renegotiate her non-negotiable fiscal rules, or maybe both later this autumn. Whatever she does, she's going to need to make sure that her decisions align with key public sentiment this time. Otherwise, the announcements of all these shiny new capital projects will be forgotten about. But let me know what you think in the comments below, and for more content you could subscribe to the channel or even become a member for access to streams and behind the scenes updates. Thanks for watching, and until next time, I'll see you later.